we begin in Tel Aviv, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has justified the Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, saying that national security for Israel was the justification essentially for the attack. Let's take a listen to his speech.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. In recent months, Iran has taken steps that it has never taken before, steps to weaponize this enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival.
All right, let's discuss the rise in oil prices and everything else that's attached to this attack on Iran's nuclear facilities by Israel with Christof Ruhl, who's a senior research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, joining us from London. Good morning to you, sir. Thanks so much for being with us. We did see oil prices initially spike by about 13%, then pare back some of those gains. Are traders betting on a de-escalation?
Good morning, first of all. I think what we see is a pattern which we have seen before, a big event, spiking oil prices, and then unclarity on whether this is going to be a more long-term thing or not. And what we have seen before, that when these events disappeared, when there was only one attack or something like that, oil prices adjusted downwards pretty fast. Now, what happens next, I think, will entirely depend on how events on the ground unfold. If there is going to be a more prolonged conflict, we will see oil prices edging up. If there's more tit for tat and more fear of this escalation affecting the oil sector in Iran or the Straits of Hormuz or refineries there, we will see oil prices going up and staying higher for longer. But not knowing that, people know that generally there's an oversupply in the market, and so they're adjusting downwards for the time being.
Speaking of higher for longer, JP Morgan released a note yesterday saying in a worst case scenario, oil could rise to $130 a barrel. Can you see it getting that high?
Yeah, look, everything is possible, always. You know, that's always true in life. It's also true for oil markets. I think here there's something very important, which also helps explain why oil prices are relatively muted. We have actually a big buffer in the market. If you recall the oil market discussions over the last few months, they were all focused around one topic, which is that OPEC Plus had, for many years now, held back a lot of production to keep prices up, had a schedule pre-announced by which they would gradually increase production to normalize the situation. And then starting with April and then May and June, 3 times, it produced much more than they had announced in that schedule into the market. And people were wondering, why are they doing this? Why are they eroding their spare capacity so fast? And there were 3 reasons given for that, or 3 reasons discussed by the market. The first one was what OPEC Plus itself said. They said, we have some members who are not compliant. And most mentioned country was no secret was Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan said we cannot just adjust our production downward to quota. We have to produce more because of international contracts and all of that. And so OPEC Plus said and indicated that they were doing this massive increase in production in order to punish those members of their own organization, which were, in quotation marks, cheating. The second reason was more of a conspiracy reason. So people said, especially around the time when Trump visited the Gulf region, they said, oh, maybe they're doing this because they want to do him a favor. Maybe there's something in the making, tighter sanctions on Russia, tighter sanctions on Iran and Venezuela, or something similar to what we are seeing right now. And in order to make that possible without a major disruption of global oil markets, they are producing into the market way ahead. That would be a medium-term reason. And the third suspicion was always that they do this because in the long term, we are facing probably a situation of peak oil or peak plateau oil demand very soon. And in the long term, if you have a market which is no longer growing, and the oil market was always growing since it exists, but if that stops, then if you're an oil producer, in order to just keep the volumes of your exports constant, you by definition have to take market share from somebody else. And how do you do that? You usually compete on price. And so the third reason was the long-term reason that people thought maybe they are fighting for market share already now, because when that process starts, they want to be producing flat out and not trying at that bad situation to have to bring additional products on the market and crash prices even further. Now we can step back and we can look at these three things again, and we can say maybe all three of them are true. OPEC Plus had a problem with non-compliant members in the short term, so that called for probably an early production increase. There was always the suspicion, and we will never find out, but maybe something was discussed, along the lines, we may need a cushion in the market because of sanctions, because of policies, because of warfare. And certainly the third one is a correct one. In the very long term, they must have been afraid about their losing market share and wanted to be in a prime pole position for before a downward race on prices exists, to have to be producing flat out. They are the cheapest producer in the world, and they can maintain market share at lower prices longer than anybody else. So I think all three things work together. And when you put yourself in the shoes now of OPEC Plus or the organization or the major oil producers, it was a prudent thing to say, okay, then let's try to get rid of the spare capacity in time and let's improve production faster at the risk of prices coming down a little bit, but we can sustain it longer. And there may be these other reasons, side benefits, disciplining in the own organization, and providing cushions for global disruption. So all these things came together. It made sense, it happened, and it seems to be working.
See, this is why we have you on the show. Thank you so much for the breakdown there, from market share dynamics to the Trump visit to the Middle East, to OPEC trying to, discipline non-compliant members. Now, speaking of members, the Gulf states, the Saudis, the UAE, Jordan, they've all condemned Israel's attacks. It looks like they're wary of their oil facilities being put at risk. How many barrels of oil are at risk in that region if this spreads?
Oh, this can go up to 20 million. I mean, when you take the traffic on the streets of Hormuz plus all the production of big countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran itself. So nobody wants to imagine a world where all of that is out at the same time. But you can see it's a problem which can be scaled up and down. If you're only talking about Iran, only again in quotation mark, that's already 3.5 million barrels per day. If you take the big boys next door, it ratchets up pretty fast. I think the key to watch is infrastructure. If there are either attacks of Israel or some of its allies, or of Iran against either refineries in Iran, ports of Iran, or then of Iran against the shipping through the Straits of Hormuz, then there's real trouble brewing. It's the Straits of Hormuz, which is the global bottleneck in oil transport, which is the most important factor here. Right now, it looks as if careful targets have been picked to signal that everybody wants to avoid oil infrastructure.
Okay, great. So then with the Iranian hardliners that want to target the Strait of Hormuz, wouldn't that be Iran impacting itself as well? I guess with the shadow fleets of oil that it's selling, do you think the Strait of Hormuz could be at risk, or do they realize that could also hurt them as well?
Yes, but the problem is that sometimes, especially when people go down, strong men go down, strong regimes go down, and so they go down in flames knowing that they're going down. They still prefer to have sort of a Wagnerian end. So the risk here I'm talking about, in less cryptic terms, is that Israel has so much military superiority that if Iran decides that they cannot really touch Israel, that they cannot really retaliate, and that they are just lying there for the world to see helplessly, then that may trigger quite an irrational response, which in the eyes of the leadership there probably is a response which says, okay, if we have to go down, then at least with a big bang. And that could trigger activity against global oil markets, even if they hurt their own country. That historically is not something which we haven't seen before.
Gotcha. A final question for you is monetary policy. Well, what do higher oil prices, if they are sustained, mean for, I guess, some central bankers like in the European Central Bank? I know what higher oil prices means for Germany and other nations. They've been on an easing cycle. Does that mean they would have to switch, switch course?
This is a very tricky question, but the short answer is that if you have a one-off change in oil price, it's a relative price, even if it's upward, then if it stays there, it will not be inflationary in the long term. It will adjust. This is just a relative price shifting around. But until it gets to this adjustment, you will have an inflationary impact. You see prices increasing. You see immediately petrol prices increasing. Consumers don't like that, so you will see people reacting. Whether these increases, take the US as an example, whether there really is a sustainable increase in petrol prices, whether that adds to consumers becoming less willing to expend money and therefore to the economy sort of moving towards recession, or whether that adds only to inflation because everybody translates these high prices together with what may happen with tariffs and so on, and is willing to continue expenditures, is too hard to forecast at the end of the day. But it certainly is an unwelcome disruption in an global economic environment, which is already on the edge because of the tariff uncertainty.
Certainly. Christof Ruhl, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Senior Research Scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy, Columbia University, joining us from London. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.